And we're close, guys. I feel it. Sometimes April was giving me a hard time last week. She said, "Man, you're really dragging this Easter thing out." So I feel that too, but I hope too at the same time. Like I obviously gave her a hard time back, but um, there's just so much that's happening here, and I feel like so many times we just kind of skip over this stuff. So we're close. I'll say that. But I'm going to do what you don't want me to do in a series like this, where it's been going on since Easter. I'm actually going to circle back to something we looked at the week before last. But the good news is, I think, that we're only going to look at really one word today. That's really my focus, is just one word. So I don't know what to promise you with that. Maybe it'll be fairly short. Maybe it won't be at all. But John 15 is where we're going to be. We're actually going to be back in verse 1 today. So again, not the entire concept, even though I think it's important, but this is something we talked about back on Father's Day. And when we talked about this, again, it was a few weeks ago, we talked about how this particular passage and some others with it that we looked at, we talked about how important it was, our relationship with the Lord. We talked about how being connected to the vine and God being the vine dresser. And again, how critical that is to our relationship with the Lord. So that's the passage we're going to look at, John 15:1. Jesus speaking. He says, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser." And so when I looked at that passage, and when I was thinking about what to preach on today, or this was what I was thinking about to preach about last week, this passage kept coming to my mind, and as I was reading it, one word stood out to me. Any thoughts on what the one word is? Which one? Yeah, true. I mean, it bugged me almost, like it was standing out that much to me. And I find it very interesting when I read through the Word of the Lord and finding different, I say phrases or words, and it's like, why is that there? Why is it there? And I think anytime there's a word like that that's there, there's a reason, right? I believe that this is indeed the Word of God, and there's a reason that the Lord Himself, as He's speaking, He chooses or chose the words probably carefully, as some of us do when we try to make conversation today. So again, when our attention's drawn to these, I always spend some time with it, look into it, and just kind of try to get a feel for exactly why it's there. That's something that when I was in youth group, my youth pastor at the time, he would always tell me, and the word that he used, that he kind of introduced this topic to, was therefore, right? And that's just a random word, but he'd say if you find that word therefore, you need to find what it's there for. And it just stuck with me. And all through Bible college and everything between, that concept of, if there's a word that's sticking out to you, if the Lord's kind of illuminating that to you, to your spirit or whatever, just find out what it's there for. And so I dug into it a little bit more, and I'm just going to be completely transparent this morning that this is, I'm going to say almost common sense, but I don't mean that derogatory. But I think this is pretty cut and clear of why this word "true" is actually used here. But why is it used, right? How is it used? Why is it used in this particular context? So alethinos is the Greek word here for true. And so the other ways that it's used, I'm going to read you several. But what's interesting is when they define this word, it's actually the opposite of multiple things. So with the exception of the very end, everything I'm saying, it's the opposite of. So make sure you pick up on that. This means the opposite to what is fictitious or counterfeit or imaginary. It's simulated, right? It's pretended. It's opposite to what is imperfect, defective, frail, uncertain. And then it is true, and it is sincere, right? So fictitious, it's counterfeit, it's imaginary, it's simulated, it's pretend, it's not perfect, it's not defective, it is frail, it is uncertain, but it is true, and it is sincere. Alethinos is used multiple times throughout the word true, and we'll read this just a little bit later, a few other times that it's used. But probably the best way to show this dichotomy between the word, again, is it's an opposite to something else, that there's genuine, right? And then there's like a knockoff product, right? There's something that's genuine, it's true, it's what you anticipated, and then there's a knockoff or an imitation of that very thing. I shared this with some people, and I can't remember if April was there or not, so you guys can't tell her, right, that I'm talking about this, because she's still kind of sensitive to it. A few weeks ago, when we were on vacation, we were shopping at a straw market, and I don't know if you guys have ever been to that in a different country, but it's kind of chaos. And I'm trying to police the girls who are just going everywhere and doing everything. And April's on a mission, and so are the girls, to find something that is unique to that area and as a souvenir, which I'm all for. Just it's super chaotic where we're at. And April is one of those. Oh, you guys know her. She's very kind, 99.9% of the time, and she's so patient, obviously, and all that kind of stuff. And so somebody talks to her, right? What's she going to do? She's going to sit there and talk to them. And so going through this straw market with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of booths and people just constantly, hey, come buy my product. Hey, come talk to me. Like I'm telling the girls, let's just keep moving. You see something that's okay, but otherwise just keep moving. Yes, it's rude to walk past them as they're talking to you, but if we stop, we're going to be here for hours. And so this little old lady caught April's attention, and so the whole train stopped, and we're now talking to this little old lady. And again, April's looking for something that's unique to that area and a souvenir. And she had kind of had her heart set on, and so did the girls, some like jewelry of some sort. My hope was that it was cheap jewelry. And so this lady was like, "Well, I have the perfect thing for you." I don't know if I'm gonna say it right, but it's conch shells. You guys, is that right? Am I saying that correct? Okay, so there was some conch shell earrings that she had handmade, and and the price wasn't too bad. I can't remember exactly, so I don't want to speculate about that. But we were like, okay, in my mind, I'm thinking price isn't bad. But then the lady says that these are handmade, they're unique. I made them. I'm like, nah, no, she didn't. But I'm not there to do that, and so April's talking to her back and forth, and she's like, "Well, we'll see. I'll come back to her," which I was proud of her for doing that. But we made it maybe halfway down the aisle. She's like, "I really need to get those earrings. That's what I want. They're unique. They're made from a shell that's not local to us." And this little lady I connected with, she handmade them, all this kind of stuff. So she goes back and buys them. And it wasn't too much further along in the straw market where we saw those same handmade original conch things that she was I'll say duped, but she was sold an imitation of what was to be the real thing, right? She was sold on what really she thought was the real thing, and again, I'm all for that. But she got this imitation piece. Now she'll wear them. I'm sure I hope she does. But she's kind of sensitive about the subject that she got sold something fake, and because she trusted this lady, like they connected. This little sweet old woman just flat out lied to her, bigger than anything, and sold her this imitation. And it reminded me too of this last Thursday. I think got the opportunity to go to Washington D.C. and the girls were wondering, like they were talking to us, when were you here? What has happened? All this kind of stuff. And when I was in sixth grade, our school took a trip to Washington D.C. And I just can't imagine, because I know my friends. I don't. The girls were fine, but my friends. I remember we had to hold our teachers' hands in sixth grade walking through DC because of the way we were behaving. So you can imagine the trip. But we, at the time, Oakley sunglasses were popular. Perhaps they are now. I don't know. But we got off this tour bus, and there was, in retrospect, what was really a shady-looking guy selling Oakleys out of his coat, actually. And so I wasn't necessarily interested in them, but several of my friends were. And despite the teacher's advice, of course, they bought several Oakleys. And again, come to find out, just strictly imitation. Again, the sketchy guy should have given it away, but they thought they got a good deal. They thought they got a great deal, but what they were given, what they were promised, essentially was something that was a knockoff, right? It was an imitation. I think this kind of shows those stories, again, 20 years apart at least, shows like this occurrence that we have experienced. And I'm sure if we're brave enough, bold enough, we've probably all been in a situation similar to that, or at least like allured by it, right? Like maybe you didn't fall for it. Maybe you're not willing to admit that piece. But I do think that we've all been like drawn in by this promise of something that's not really true. It's just kind of an imitation product. And so this is that use when we talk about true, the alethinos. It shows that when Jesus and John are using this word, they're talking about what is real, like the really handmade, genuine earrings, the true Oakley product, like the real thing, not the knockoff, not the thing that just appears to be much like it, but it's not. And it's not the thing that was promised. Like April was upset that lady told her she made them, right? Like she said that. And that gentleman with the awkward long coat and pulling sunglasses out, looking around frequently, promised us that those were Oakley sunglasses, right? And so, despite being promised and told those things, we bought into it, we believed it, and I think that's what's happening here. And when Jesus uses this word, and when John uses this word, alethinos, it's he's talking about, he's being specific that this is the true product. This is what's genuine. This is what you really need. This is what you really want, despite of what maybe in the market they're trying to sell you. This is what you really want. And so I'm going to look just at three other passages very quickly where John specifically used this same word. Again, alethinos. In John 1:9, John speaking, he says, the true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. Of course, speaking there of Jesus, the true light. And again, as we read that particular passage as true light, we have to understand then that there's also untrue light, right? There's the real, genuine thing that's over here. This is what Jesus was and kind of prophesied about. This is Jesus. But then over here, we have the untrue light, the knockoff, the imitation product, what may look like him, what may sound like him, look good, sound good, maybe promised even to be good or the real thing, but it's not the real light. In John 4:23, this is Jesus speaking. It says, but the hour is coming and is now here when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such people to worship him. When the true worshipers. So again, we've got this dichotomy. We got these folks over here who are genuinely worshiping the Lord. You know, they're genuinely going after him. They're pursuing the Lord. But then because of the way this word is used, we have this dichotomy. So over here, there's also the untrue or the imitation worship, the one that's fake. It may look right? It may have the appearance of true worship. It may even have the feel sometimes of true worship. But there's something about it, and I'm not going to quantify that up here this morning because I don't know that I could, but there's something about it that makes it untrue. It's not the true product. So again, we see this difference just simply because of this word that is emphasized, at least here in my opinion, that we have the real thing and then we have the knockoff. And then lastly, in John 6:32, Jesus said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, it is not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but my Father gives you the true bread from heaven. All right, so again, right, last time probably, over here we've got the true bread, the genuine bread, what truly is needed, what's truly going to feed, what's truly going to provide, what actually came from the Father. And then over here we have bread that looks the same, may feel the same, may even taste the same, but it's not the bread from the Father. It's not what he provided for us. So again, this concept, using this word alethinos, it comes in and it just lays it out before us just with one simple word, that there's a difference between something that's true in this sense and something that's just not true. There's something that's genuine, that God has promised, that God has given, that God has sustained in and with and through us, that's just true. And then we have this other stuff over here that, and maybe this is a much larger pile of things, but that it's just not true. It's a knockoff product. It's an imitation. It's something the world has promised or someone else has promised us, in a sense that this will fit the need that really will only come from what is true. In John 15:1, again, same passage we already looked at, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. So again, this true vine now here indicates that there is one that's true from the Father, one that makes sense, one that's the real thing, and there is a false vine. There's a knockoff. There's an imitation product. And this is crucial for us to understand because this is one of those things, again, in this series we've been talking about what we need to remember, and this is what we need to remember today, in my opinion, that who or what you're connected to matters. And you've heard me say that before. You've heard me say that like last year, probably one of the first series that we navigated together, that who or what you're connected to, it does truly matter. And the promise of the imitation, what's over here, what's not true, what's not genuine, what's just an imitation, despite the promise to fulfill what we need, despite the promise to meet our need and maybe even exceed our expectations, it'll never fill or fit the need that only the true product can provide, that only the genuine vine can provide. A little bit later in this passage in verse 5, and I'm just going to look at the beginning of verse 5 now. Jesus goes into a little bit more detail here. So in John 15:5, again, part A, he says, I'm the vine, and you are the branches. And so it kind of gives some more explanation or the intention of this analogy that he's using. And there's some speculation that perhaps this passage is kind of taking place as they're walking towards the garden, right? So maybe they're literally seeing a vine here. Maybe it's happening in the upper room. I don't think there's exact clarification there. But nonetheless, Jesus is using this analogy. And he says that it's the reason here because I, Jesus speaking, I'm the vine. Right? I am the vine, but you are the branches. And he's speaking to his disciples there, but this applies to us as well. So we too are to be the branches that are hopefully connected to the true vine. And again, this is his intention that we must be, they must be, the disciples, and we must be connected to the vine, to Jesus, and therefore allowing God as the vine dresser to do what only he can do. And we talked about on Father's Day, we said pruning was part of the process, and I stand beside that. Even though I don't like it, I believe it to be 100% true. In the latter part of verse 5, John 15:5, part B, it says, whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Right? So apart from me, you can do nothing. But connected, then there's the proof in the pudding, if you will, where it comes from bearing fruit. So when we're connected to the wrong thing, when we latch on to the wrong thing, when we pursue the wrong thing, then you and I, we can do nothing. We may look productive. We may be doing a lot of things, again, surrounded by this stuff that is imitation product. It's knockoff. It's not the real thing. It's not from the Lord. We can look busy. We can act busy, right? We can still wear those sunglasses. We can still put on the earrings, but it's not the real thing, right? And so we essentially are accomplishing nothing when we're not connected to the vine. But when we're connected to the vine, when we have the true product, when we're the true bread and we're true worshipers and we're connected to the true vine, then a result of that is we will bear fruit. We'll produce good fruit. And that fruit will be, again, the byproduct of being connected to the vine. Because if we're not connected to the vine, Jesus made it very clear that we would do nothing. We would do nothing. So again, the purpose, right, of this analogy, if you will, is to understand that we are a part of a process, right? That includes pruning, but it's so much is dependent upon us being connected to what matters. And I think too many times in our lives we'll get connected to some of the wrong things, to some of the wrong people. Maybe that's purposely, maybe it's inadvertently, but the result is the same. The result, honestly, is nothing. And I say nothing, but really, I think we could extrapolate that and say that it's hurt and it's pain and it's uncomfortability and it's chaos and it's darkness and it's hopelessness. And there's just so many different things that come about as a result of us pursuing that which is not true. Because the reality is even though Jesus paid the price for our sin, that for us as individuals, as human beings, there's times that we still struggle giving up ourselves, right? It's easier to take this path towards what's an imitation. It doesn't cost as much, meaning that I don't have to let go of everything. And we've talked about that so many times. It's difficult for me to relinquish control of my life. And so therefore, sometimes it's just easier for me to say, well, I'll take the imitation product. I'll go to church and I'll pretend, because that's going to be easier than truly giving God all of my heart and allowing him to be the one that's in control. Right? I'm not saying either is necessarily easy, but oftentimes we find ourselves going towards the imitation product because it is an easier path for us. It doesn't cost us as much of ourselves. But as branches, and we'll talk more about this later, as branches, we're to produce fruit, right? And that people can see and that they can see and be like, man, I want to be a part of that. That's our role. That's our job as being the branches. But we can only do that being connected to the true vine. I myself, and again, speaking of my own life, at different times, have been connected to the wrong things, and people see me and as a professing Christian, and they would say, "I don't want anything to do with that," right? Because it's imitation, it's a knockoff, it's not the real thing. And I hope and I pray that maybe at least once or twice that people say, "Oh, wow, that is different. And that is genuine. He is connected to the real thing." And to be honest, this position over here, and I have no idea why I chose this way. It's just what I did. Um, but this position over here, being connected to the true vine, is what feels the most comfortable to us once we get there. It's probably the hardest to get to, but once we get there, it is comfortable. It's because that's what we were intended to do, right? These things can be, again, alluring. They can be persuasive in many ways, but once we get here, this is where we want to be. And when we're here, we are producing fruit, good fruit, productive fruit, things that, again, people want to be a part of versus the things that no one wants to be a part of. So, again, we have the vine, which represents Jesus. We talked about this already several times, but the vine represents Jesus as I'm going to say, the sole source for our nutrition or survival, however you want to look at that. He is our sustainer. So if we are branches that are connected to the true vine, then He is the one only that would sustain us, that would take care of us, that would provide for us. Where when we are connected to the untrue, the imitation, the knockoff product, that's what we go to for our survival, for anything that we need. Again, the nutrition aspect of it, whatever it may be, we pursue these things. And so, again, when we go this direction, the fruit we produce is what is not indicated in the Bible. It's what is not good. It's what people don't want to be a part of. But when we're connected to Him, He is the one sustains us. Our roots are represented in Him, that He finds is sufficient for what we need and gives that to us, because without being connected to it, then the branch by itself would not survive. So that's the other thing, too, that we need to remember, that as a branch, we are dependent on the vine. I think that's a good place to be. It frustrates me. It complicates things for me to be dependent upon someone else other than myself. But we are dependent upon the Lord and being connected to Him for our survival. And again, the true vine is where we want and need to be. So the concern, as I mentioned several other times, is that we can be connected to this stuff over here, the untrue vine. And I could go through and list some things that come to my mind, but the reality is I would miss something, and or one of you guys there or somebody watching online would be like, "Oh, he's picking on me," right? And so I'm just not going to do that. I think by this time, as we're talking about this, as we've kind of made this clarification between the 2 points, that you got some untrue vine things that are in your head. If not, I think they'll come to you, right? But a false vine, again, without trying to label one thing specifically, really is anything that takes God's place in our life. Anything at all that takes God's place in our life as our sustainer, as our provider, any of those things become an untrue vine to us. Anything that we go to for attention, or again, yes, survival, but attention and pursuit thereof higher than anything over here, this becomes an untrue vine to us. Anything that we look to for fulfillment becomes an untrue vine for us. And what I want to say about this stuff over here, kind of in this pot of this untrue vine, this imitation, this fake, this knockoff stuff, is that it's not necessarily bad in and of itself. And again, you've heard me say that many a times. But the problem is that we take this stuff. I'm going to use my family as an example because it's super important to me. Uh, you may disagree, but I don't think my family is a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. But if I take my family and I elevate it higher than God's place in my life, and now it's become a bad thing, right? So I think my job, which I enjoy most days, is a good thing, right? I believe the Lord allows me to work through that and to do that. I am talking about my secular job too, by the way, not pastoring. I'm not brave enough to talk about that yet. So I believe in my secular job that's something the Lord has kind of planted me there and allows me to work with different people. And again, most of the time I do enjoy it. But if I begin to look at my job as my source of income, right, as my source of sustainment, fulfillment, more than I do the Lord, then it becomes a bad thing. And so what I'm trying to say is we can have this stuff in this pot that we should pursue, that we should take time with our family. We should work, I believe, if we're able, and to do those things. And again, there's a lot of other things, but just two examples that these things in and of themselves aren't bad, but when we create them to be the vine in our life, that's when they become a bad thing. And I think that's probably one of the worst places we can be, because how do we tell ourselves to go away from our family? How do we tell ourselves to stop working and those kinds of things? And it's not that we go away from the family. It's not that we stop working. It's that we stop putting them in a place they never belonged. It's that we stop going to them for things that only God's supposed to provide us. It's that we stop looking for them to sustain or to produce something that is just not intended for it or them to do. So again, the stuff in this category, I think oftentimes we miss a lot of, because we say, "Oh no, he's not talking about my family. He's not talking about my job. He's not talking about those things," because they're good things. But that may be the very thing in your life or my life that we continue to go to as our source, when it should only be what is the true vine that we find in Jesus Christ. Do you see what I'm saying? There's some good, and there's can be some bad things. Don't get me wrong. There can be some really bad things over here that we go to as our source of survival. But many times we miss the ones that are good because we elevate them to the wrong place in our lives. These other vines, they offer the promise of being what you need or what you want. Again, to survive or to be happy, to produce the right fruit that you want, the right look or image, whatever it may be. But the reality is, as we already said, these are just knockoff product. Now, it's all part of the plan. And I know this is a bold statement, but I believe it to be true. This stuff can all be, if even the good stuff, if we put it at the wrong place in our life, can all be a part of the enemy's plan to steal, kill, and destroy us. If we are focused on the wrong thing, if we go to them as a source of anything that only God can provide for us. He says, "I am the true vine." Right? And the emphasis obviously there on the word true. John 15:5, right? Remember, nothing, we can do nothing apart from him. Can you be a father? Sure. Can you be the best father you can be if you pursue your family as your source? No, you can't. Right? Can you be a good employee? Again, same process. We will accomplish nothing as long as we're connected to and pursuing the vine, to which is the imitation, the knockoff. So I want to quickly consider the result of being attached to that true vine, right? We said being fruitful. Being fruitful. We could talk about this for weeks in Galatians 5, and talks about the different fruit. But I want to settle pretty much to this principle. Being fruitful by being connected to the true vine. So what is true, what is the Lord, means that your life is producing what it is intended to. Hear me out, right? Your life is producing what it was intended to. And I think that's what's so fantastic about all of us sitting in this room, us watching online, that we are intended to do different things. We are different. We have different roles, and within the church and within our families, we have in different things, and that's what makes us unique. And thank God for that, because we can function better, as we talked many days ago, as far as that series goes, as being different parts, right? We're different parts of one member, one body. And so that's the way it represents here. Being fruitful is being connected to the vine. Again, we can extrapolate that, and we will. We'll talk about it later. We can talk about what fruit should look like, and all those kinds of things. But what it really comes down to is that your life is producing what it was intended to do. And again, I talked about, once you get over here and once you find that true vine, and once you're kind of connected to that true vine, and once you're producing that fruit, once you're doing what you were intended to do, it's so natural to be here. What's funny to me, and I'm saying this is about my situation, I wouldn't laugh at yours, but I think you could relate. We've labored so hard sometimes to do things that we just were never intended to do. And it was so difficult, even though it should have been probably a fairly easy task or situation. But because we were never intended to do that or be that or go there, we've labored so hard at it. But then on the other hand, when we're walking in and producing the fruit, and because we're connected to the vine, doing what we're supposed to do, it's just, I'm not saying it's super easy all the time, but it's so much easier. It's natural to us to be in this position because it's what God intended us to do. God never intended us to go to someone else as our source of hope, joy, peace, or anything as far as sustaining us on a physical level, on a spiritual level, or anything in between. He created us to be connected to him by the vine, which is Jesus Christ. And I just, to me, again, I say that it just seems simple, but I struggle with it. It seems so simple, but I still struggle with it. When we're connected to the vine, doing what we're intended to do, I think it's important to note too that there's going to be seasons, right? There's seasons where things are going to be much easier and much more fulfilling than others, but that we're still producing fruit. And I would caution you too, because I found myself, even within the last year at times questioning uh, producing the fruit that I'm supposed to. Am I connected to the vine the way I'm supposed to? Am I doing what I was intended to do in different aspects and roles of my life? I think too quickly we can again kind of reverse the order which we look. We can begin to look at ourselves. James, are you really doing that? Right? I begin to look to myself for validation of what I'm supposed to be doing over here. Right. So what I'm saying is I almost create this situation where instead of looking to the Lord to say, "Hey, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I intended to do this right now? Am I following you the way I'm supposed to? Am I being faithful to what you called me to do?" Instead of doing that, I've almost looked at myself and said, "James, are you really doing what you've been called to do?" And then by the measures of myself, like we could say yes or no based off a lot of things that really don't matter, but they're things that look like they matter. They're things that would be imitations of things that matter. They're things that could produce like this false hope or sense of success or whatever it may be. And again, I'm talking whether it be the church or work or family or the move, anything in between. Like I was just too often turned to myself and created myself kind of as this self-sustaining vine. But what's so important to me, and if you're like me at all, and I know some of you are, I'm trying not to make eye contact right now, but I know some of you are, is that if you look inward even to try to sustain yourself and to what you're connected to, we've got to be intentional about pursuing the true vine. Because as good as you are, as great as you are, as incredible as a person you are, you make a terrible God. And I do too, right? And so we got to be intentional about pursuing the true vine. So I'll say this kind of in closing that you heard me say it so many times that we have choices to make. We have choices to make in life. And what or who you're connected to, and obviously I'm talking about the Lord. That's it right now. We've talked about this in the context of where you attend church and all those kinds of things, but I'm talking about being connected to the Lord. Who or what you're connected to, it absolutely matters. And we have that choice. We have the choice to be connected to the Lord, or we have the choice to be connected to that which is untrue, right? That is which is a knockoff or an imitation product. And obviously, my encouragement to you this morning is to pursue that which is true. Pursue that which is true. Lay aside the things that are untrue, the things that you just, let's be honest, you know they're a knockoff product. You know it's an imitation. You know it's not what it's supposed to be, but yet, for whatever reason, maybe different reasons, you continue to pursue this. Again, my encouragement to you, us all this morning, is to pursue the true vine. It's only Jesus Christ. He is the source, again, physically, spiritually, emotionally, of all that we need. We don't need to go outside of Him, being that Jesus alone, through God and the Holy Spirit working in us. It's not a limitation, it's supremacy and sufficiency both. He's got it all. We don't need to go anywhere else to find it. But knowing, right, that there's these imitations, these knockoff products out there, we got to be careful. We got to protect our heart, and we got to be intentional. Just simply going through life to say I'm going to go through life and hope it all works out, we're probably more easily going to find ourselves in this knockoff or imitation. So again, my encouragement this morning, what we need to remember this morning is where you're connected. It does matter. Where you're connected, who you're connected to, it does matter. And there is a genuine product that the one of a kind that only the Lord Himself can offer us has been offered to us all this morning. So if you don't know the Lord, I pray that would be today's decision, that you would accept, again, this connection to the true vine that's only acceptable, only available through a relationship with Jesus Christ. And if you're like the majority, at least in the room that I assume, that have a relationship with Him, that I would encourage you to make sure that we're not pursuing these knockoff and imitation products. You have been invited into a relationship with a true product. Why would we not want to pursue that? I want to pray. God, again, thank you for today. God, I thank you that you have allowed us to be connected to you through your Son, Jesus Christ. God, and I'm thankful that aside from that, we can do nothing, because I think at many times that's where I found myself, in just a big pile of nothing. My life is just a mess on my own. God, I'm so thankful that when we're connected to you, that what is produced is fruit. And God, it feels good to produce fruit. And I just want to encourage those of us that are struggling right now, God, that you would help us to be sure that we're pursuing the true vine. God, I pray that through your spirit you'd speak to us what is untrue, what is an imitation, what we've tried to go to as our source of sustainment or happiness or whatever it may be. God, I just pray that you would bring those things to our mind and help us to focus solely on you as our source of everything. God, whether it be as a good husband or father or mother or employee or whatever it may be, God, whatever titles, whatever roles we fill or do in life, God, I pray that you would help us to know it's you are our source for that. Being connected to your Son, Jesus Christ, is the only way that we'll be able to produce anything that truly matters when it comes down to it. God, I do pray for anyone who doesn't know you as a personal Savior. God, I just pray that you would not relent on their heart today. God, I pray that you would just continue uh, to make it known, God, that you are absolutely needed, without a question. You are needed, and I pray that, Lord, that you would just continue to knock on the doors of those hearts, God, and that you would continue to put the right people in their paths to help them to understand that it's needed, it's necessary, and it's good. God, I admit that even when it doesn't feel comfortable, even when it doesn't make sense, God, a relationship with you is the only sustainment we need and the only one that makes sense. God, I pray that you would help us to remember that. God, we thank you for all that you've done, God, and all that you're doing. It's in the name of Jesus that I pray.